Welcome, friends. Sounds Shakespearean, but Chris, Joachim, and our neophyte, our new friend, Israel. We convene today to discuss formally individualism, or individuality rather, and naturalism in art, specifically painting, perhaps we should say, okay, more precisely. And the topic took shape in my mind in response to Israel's note, what is formerly called comment, below one of the postings, YouTube postings that I had. And Israel is noting at that time that in the Renaissance, we have the rise of individuality expressed by the paintings and naturalism, as opposed to, well, the implication seemed to be that you do not have individuality in medieval painting, or naturalism for that matter. And it seemed to me at the time that these two notions are very often taken for granted, to a great extent in the Anglo-American world, okay? The sense that now we have moved to the individual character of the person from a medieval time in which we're fossilized on these universals, the icon that seems to be so abstract and abstracted from our ordinary life that it seems dead with respect to modern images. And Israel has a video where he discusses Rubens. He has others, but he is emphasizing again this even I don't think I'm doing a disservice to your discussion, Israel, this outburst of individuality, of the individual sentiment that is coming forth and it's protruding. It's really becoming dominant. And this is what we do not have in the Middle Ages. All right. Now, it seems to be that this understanding of things deserves to be questioned. Do you have any preliminary observations, considerations to share?
Well, I can only talk about my own personal journey into discovering painting and art.
All right.
In that I do not come from an artistic background.
And you mean your parents were Philistines?
They were working class, you know.
Okay. Okay.
And the first encounters I had with art were with religious depictions of the 17th century.
All right.
And I related those paintings to reality, to when I was visiting Spain and my grandparents. And so what I saw in those paintings, I immediately got those paintings, what they're about. That it was a spiritual experience that the paintings were conveying. But yet they were based in reality, in elevating the ordinary person. And so what amazes me about that time is that that ordinary people could be elevated and connected to the divine, to the mystical. And really, that has formed my basis for art, in that I see art more than an aesthetic expression. That it goes beyond the aesthetic. The aesthetic is there, giving life.
Absolutely.
But I would call the mystical or the human.
Absolutely.
And that's my point. That's how I see art.
Right. Now, when it comes to the Middle Ages, clearly, if we want to call it art now in casual terms, yeah, art, ars techne, yeah, the production, human production, yeah. We also can speak, of course, of fine arts. But now in the Middle Ages, surely the image is approached in a mystical way. You would agree.
I agree with that.
I mean, we
But
have iconography that, you go to church and you
I
see Cimabue or others, yeah, or of course,
I agree. I agree
yeah,
with that.
yeah.
I
So
agree with
what?
that.
Yeah,
But it's but what I'm saying is that doesn't really exclude what I'm saying, because
no,
that was the way of communication of that time.
yeah. What
But
happened in the middle?
my point is that an aesthetic object is not just the painting has become aestheticized.
Yes,
Okay,
yes. Well,
and
sure.
my point is that if you're in Naples now, you can see the paintings of Giuseppe de Ribera, and you can see that in those paintings there is a new individuality of the individual, which was never seen before.
Yes, right,
And then this was taken with Velázquez and Rembrandt. That's a new portrayal of the human being,
right,
which was never seen before, I don't think.
right,
And that human being was also depicted with a kind of inner dignity and mysticism.
right.
So that reality itself, and the human experience has a divine relationship.
Right. Um,
And that
mhm.
is what motivates me in my painting.
Okay,
That idea, so that I don't see painting just purely as an aesthetic
that's commendable. That's
act.
commendable. The notion of aestheticism is essentially modern, even though the etymology is Greek. But it definitely did not mean for Plato what it means today, aesthesis. But you bring to the table, Israel, a few notions, most notably that of reality. And for one thing, you seem, whatever you said, lends itself to be understood in terms of an equation of reality and experience, or ordinary experience.
Yes.
Would you care to unpack the notion of reality?
Well, I think it kind of relates to what you were saying about philosophy and Leonardo da Vinci, and how I see it. Today, in today's world, is that the artist has to bring themselves to the painting, their own experience. That as I said, the aesthetic aspect of painting cannot exist unless it has that human experience of relating it to, as I say, your real existence, your life.
Okay, so by reality, you
And
mean
so my aim really,
Mhm.
my aim is to elevate
The human
the human
experience.
or reality or the human experience. Yes.
Okay, that's what I thought. Yes. So by reality, you mean our life experience.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Our experience
Right.
to life itself. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and I do think that there is something that is we could characterize as early modern about this. Something, although the early modern I do not think is reducible to this. And let me bring up or unpack this scenario with reference to a terms and an argument that would be familiar to both the early modern and the medievals. The distinction between universal and particular. Okay. Now, you know that you probably know, Israel, that in the Middle Ages, the distinction between these two poles was very much discussed. Right? When we look at a an icon in the Middle Ages, but even early, even late Middle Ages, let's say Cimabue. Try to have an example of Cimabue posted here on the video in the editing. So if we look at this image today, we are likely to see something very stylized, very alien from our ordinary experience, something that can hardly help us appreciate the dignity of the particular as he rises to, well, to the divine. However, we are unlikely to approach Cimabue the way a medieval man would have approached Cimabue. And without in the least historicizing this difference between us and the medieval man, we could say that that distinction owes to the fact that medieval man was steeped in the Bible, that he had an intimate relationship with images that harken back to the biblical text. He would have approached Cimabue's altarpiece with devotion. He would have seen his own experience, life experience, vindicated, his suffering vindicated in the suffering of the man on the cross as painted for us stereotypically, but for him in the most intimate manner, pregnant with all of his own suffering, the farmer, whoever else was there, the shepherd, okay? And so that he would see this, what we might refer to as a universal, dry, sterile universal, he would see this in the most intimate way. He would see this as the greatest particular, the greatest vindication of particularity. Now, when we speak in these terms, and if we become familiar with the discourse of the Middle Ages, we begin to understand that that discourse is very, and let me say this in a somewhat controversial manner, perhaps, very childlike, very poetic. For the child, there is absolutely no separate, the small child, no separate, the infant, no separation between the universal and the particular. As a child, I say, Dad. Dad is my dad. Then I go out to the park and I see other dads and I call them Dad. And the parent who is ill-advised is prompt to say, no, he's not dad. He's just another man. Oh, a man? What's a man? Dad. He's a dad. He is dad. Not even a dad. He's dad. Okay? Now, what does this mean? It means that every man is dad. and that there is no abstract man. This discussion, this argument, this problem is reflected, of course, in the kernel of medieval life and art, which is the incarnation. It is not man who rises as a particular to the universal. It is, you might say, the universal, and yet this is not quite it. The universal that makes itself particular. It enters in the particular and redeems the particular, all the particulars. All men are redeemed in Christ. And yet this is still not altogether adequate, because it's not just an abstract universal that makes itself historical to redeem history. It's not just an empty concept. It is God and the human mysteriously inherent in God that somehow enters into the situation of chaos, of confusion, to redeem both universal and particular, both Israel, both Jerusalem and Athens. So the matter that we're stirring here, that I'm helping stir, is not all that self-evident, it seems to me. But Israel, I think you have placed your finger on a very important point, aside from the completely legitimate one of bracketing, at the very least, this modern notion that painting is all about aesthetics. That is, that notion, it seems to me, leads all the way into some kind of a vain sentimentalism that dies off ultimately as a leaf detached from its tree, dries out. The problem of the early modern, when you correctly, I mean, you speak of the dignity of the particular, let's say, but in fact, for let's say a Thomas Aquinas, all the way into Dante, all the way into Giambattista Vico and others, these people recognize that the particular is not a mere particular, and that a painting is not merely a particular or a universal, but that this tension, which is a conceptual one that we therefore live with, is not fundamental, but we live with it, and it is managed by the painter. So the question is, how does the universal remain in creative, positive, enlightening tension with the particular? And in the Renaissance, so we could consider, of course, the Ribera, we can consider others, we can even consider later, so-called Baroque, which is the flower of the Renaissance, really. The Velázquez, of course, but we can go back to Leonardo, Raffaello, Michelangelo. These figures, which seem to us naturalistic with respect to the medieval, are very much, it is diminishing to say, I will refer to the term right now and then bracket it, decorative, okay? That's not the point. They are poetic. They're not individualized. You cannot say that Jesus that is painted by Michelangelo in the Final Judgment is Frank Sinatra. He is not somebody...
But you can in Velázquez. You can in Velázquez. You can
yes.
in Rembrandt.
Yes, yes.
That's my point, is that...
that's moving forward. That's moving forward.
That's moving forward, yeah.
Yes. But with Michelangelo, and so what do we have? But I'll get to Velázquez in a second. Bear with me. what we have in Michelangelo, of course, is something that is recognized with as intimate. So it's not just an abstraction. Whoever was seeing Michelangelo's,
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
yeah, would see
I
it
agree.
as yes, this is intimate, and yet at the same time universal.
Yes, I agree.
Right now, but what we have here is not, however, a recovery of the particular and a rising of this raising of the particular to the universal. Just as we don't have the ascent from the finite to the infinite. Reason being that it was understood that that is an impossibility. Okay, what does that mean? The universal is the form, the particular is the content. We could think about the content in modern terms in terms of feelings. And of course, modernity develops in this direction. The feelings become more and more prominent, and they begin to assert themselves as the form itself.
Yes.
So they overshadow the classical form, and they become the new form, and they die out. Ultimately, they explode, and they commit suicide. To put it in theatrical terms. But this problem, now let's go to Velázquez. You would bring up Velázquez. Of course, these are commissions. He had to paint this prince. He had to paint that the Duke, and so forth.
No, but even in his religious paintings, even in Ribera's religious paintings, you have individual people. You can recognize them in all the different paintings.
Yes,
and it is a form of internalization of the divine.
The question then is, if that, let me place this in the conditional. If that were the case, then they would be thoroughly modern painters. I'm not convinced that that is altogether the case.
They manage to speak to our time, don't they? In that aspect, they have
not quite our time.
They have a modern aspect because the individual, you would say, has become more prominent in the modern world.
Right.
As before, maybe in the past, it was only the elite who would be individuals, in a sense.
You mean represented?
Yeah.
Right, but that didn't really matter much to the person. But yeah,
but the Caravaggio,
yes,
Ribera,
the Madonna, the Mary, the prostitute, yeah,
they gave a reality to painting, and
right.
With Ribera, you have an evolution that. Remember, these were Counter-Reformation paintings. That it goes more to the individual.
Right.
And then in Velázquez, we have a freeing of the individual.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm not.
And kind of, and this impetus into painting, with also the elevation of the everyday.
I think that is a legitimate.
Comes into painting, and gives it life. Now it is kind of suppressed when you had the academic style, but then it comes through again through painters like Courbet, Manet, Goya has elements of it into the modern age.
Right. I see. I think I understand the argument.
And so, so that, and this is what moves me essentially in painting. That's
all right.
The mystery of life and the kind of yearning to free the individual in painting in a kind of way. That's kind of in my thoughts.
Right.
I feel that painting, in a sense, got distorted by the academies, and that the whole history of art got distorted by the academies into a more aesthetic understanding of painting, which it wasn't before. That painting and art is connected to mystical experiences.
That makes sense.
And for me, and that's why I say that it is the aesthetic is kind of the vehicle for the painter, for the
right,
for the spirit. If you understand what I'm saying.
Yes, that's a very legitimate point. My qualm would pertain to this notion of the individual, which in medieval terms and Renaissance terms would be the way we understand it conventionally today, would be an abstraction, would not be the concrete that we treat it as. Individual as particular, indeed, something individualized. You may be familiar with the medieval language, the even early Renaissance language. Nobody speaks about an individual unless it is God. God is the individual. At some point, they begin to speak about individual in legal settings, because he is someone who is individuated by the law. But ordinary people are not spoken of on a current basis and ordinary language as individuals, the way we, especially in the Anglo-American world, speak of them, and everything that has been influenced by recent modernity speak of people. They were people, they were men, but they were not called individuals. And this has become most prominent with the rise of Cartesianism, with the rise, especially with Kant and his followers. So they would consider, earlier people would consider this, so what you're calling an individual, as an abstraction. So what I'm suggesting here is that we do not, in that case, we would not be faced here with an ascent from the individual to the divine, but with something more subtle. So there is the rediscovery, you could say, the rediscovery of, or even the, shall we say, a testament, okay, a testament to the hiddenness of the divine in the human.
Yes,
not of the universal, not of the universal in the particular, because that's already to assume that I am a piece of meat devoid of divinity and I have to be redeemed. I've already been redeemed because the divine is originally at the heart of my so-called particularity, of my physicality. So there is no physicality aside from spirit. The question here is that what does the painter have to deal with here? Vindicate the original dignity of the human, insofar as the human is the cradle of the divine. So do we see now a rift between the Middle Ages, the Renaissance? The Renaissance, at this point, in these terms, absolutely not. It is simply accidental that, politically accidental, that the recognizable Freddy Krueger is not a prince, but he is a farmer. It is accidental and political. You mentioned de Ribera, of course, Caravaggio. Probably the girl pulled out of the of the drowned girl pulled out of the Tevere, the Tiber River, and set up there as a model for Mary in the death of Mary. You know, that may very well be the case, and that's
Yeah, but the important thing is that these painters, like Velázquez, said in his paintings that remember that art in those days, especially when in painting like a Velázquez, was, you know, a high thing. It wasn't an everyday photo.
I'm no kidding.
And art was seen as the highest divine aspect of man. Okay.
Well,
And well,
bias, maybe not, but
yes,
close,
but you know,
close.
close. Okay, but Velázquez said, well, he painted that a woman cooking a pot with a boy.
Yes, on the side, yes, eggs.
A dwarf,
Yeah.
a man of mixed race,
Yes.
is as important as the Pope.
Yes, very Christian message, by the way.
Yeah, and that's what I find fascinating. That it goes beyond, that it tells us something very profound about humans and human nature.
Yes, yes, and it speaks perhaps a lot more to us than Cimabue and Giotto, but precisely because we have been so alienated from the Middle Ages. And but the problem there is that we are tempted as hypermoderns to draw that the greatness of the Ribera and Velázquez and so forth into our hypermodernist individualistic camp. What I'm highlighting here is an affinity of the Ribera's or Velázquez's work with medieval work, in spite of what seems to be the case. And the affinity pertains to this problem of this mandate of the painter to vindicate the inherence of the divine in the human. As far as the distinction that you most properly and correctly highlight, and I suggested just a few minutes ago that it is of a political and accidental sort. In the Middle Ages, we have what we call conventionally a feudal society, right? It's where it is a society based on intimate bonds, even blood bonds. An aristocratic family will even wind up giving its own name to all the farmers. The farmers don't even have a last name. They don't get married because there's no point. Their name is the name of the Lord, the feudal lord. They recognize themselves, their lives in that figure. So when they see the aristocrat in the painting or elsewhere, they see him as a mirror of their own dignity. He is the savior in practical terms, so much so that many of these aristocrats were actually called saviors. In Italy, for example, you have the word salvatori. Salvatori has now become, in the modern world, became popularized because all these aristocrats, these few aristocrats, spread out their name, and the name was taken up by all the people who were once underneath them, right? So everybody was called Salvatori, the saviors, the family of the saviors. Of course, they're the ones who had to go to war and defend the poor farmers. Bottom line is that when you see a painting of the Pope, when you see the painting of, the aristocrats, let's say, these people underneath did not see this as a sign that they're not inclusive, that we're left behind. No, quite to the contrary. They saw that as a vindication of every poor fellow who was dying. Right, we were cut off by the engine. So yes, so the ordinary person would see himself vindicated in that. And so, but it's very difficult because we don't live in that relationship. We don't live it. As De Lampedusa would say in the Gattopardo, the leopard, the story that they made of a film out of, you know, the leopard and with Burt Lancaster and Alain Delon, yeah, worthwhile exploring. You have a shift into the New World from the Ancien Régime. And so the old bonds, which are very intimate between the serf, you could call it today, and the lord, were replaced by, well, essentially a mercenary context, where in Lampedusa's terms, the old lions and tigers were replaced by the hyenas and the shackles. So, in other words, there was no blood bond, but it was all about money. And so, what does this tell us about the Ribera and others? We are tempted today to, because of our alienation from that blood bond, where you recognize the prince as the image of every man, just as the Christ was the image of every hero, of every man on a cross, of every decent, good man, the perfection of that, perfection of that decent man. And so every man going into the church, he would see the icon and he would see his own life in it, vindicated somehow, at least preliminarily, waiting for the other world. Today, we are tempted, alienated from that, to see Velázquez as vindicating the particular who had been left out of the picture, okay, and raising him to a dignity, even an authority that he had never had before. And I'm concerned with this take because it seems to me to be extremist in a negative way, to alienate the Velázquez from the poetic character of medieval life and art. What is the alternative slight adjustment in the interpretation of Velázquez here? Well, he is confirming that medieval impetus, that medieval mandate of the painter by saying, well, look, the divine is indeed present in this dwarf, and he too is a prince. But this dwarf, you could say he is individualized. He is still very much, well, you know, in Paul's terms, the ones he prefers as explaining everything, but even though they don't, he is very much decorative, and I think, Israel, you acknowledge this, very much decorative. Caravaggio is very decorative. But we should understand by this poetically envisioned. So the universal is still there. What we wind up having, this is the drama that I think that we are faced with in subsequent art, is that this sentiment of individuality, which is tied to the new self, the modern self, this feeling, the sense of certainty, imposes itself as its own universal, as a form that somehow at least pretends to replace the old form. The old form now being identified with the old God, which is supposed to be a mere individual, a mere universal, an abstraction, a pie in the sky. But the new man cannot do it on his own. So we need great collaboration today. We need an industry, because one little dwarf is not going to sail the man. He's not going to become God. We need all the dwarfs together. And then eventually we need all of the, what do you call them, the proletariat, to rise against the ancien régime. We need to kill the king and the queen. Of course, you know perfectly well, we all know that in order to do that, you need organization. And to organize the proletariat, you need new lords. But the new lords, again, to go back to Lampedusa, are not the old ones with whom you have a bond, an intimate, almost physical bond. The new ones are technocrats. They're merchants. Hence the rise of the merchant class in the modern world, where today, what was considered to be at the bottom of society in earlier times is raised to the top. You ask the economists for what to do, what with the direction of the state, of the country, and of your life. What should I do in life? First thing, how do I invest my money? I ask the economist, I ask the banker, even though I know that he is a spiritual sodomist, that he's out there to get me, but I trust him by compulsion because I live in a godless world. And the only mysticism that I can get is the mysticism of feelings. So I look at and again, Israel, you decry this aestheticism, but this is tied to this impetus, this yearning for the feelings to be raised to God. So we have this communion with God in feelings, whereas for the earlier art, communion with God is achieved in the element of logos. So you could say that what we ascribe to them as the intellectualism, right, of medieval times, of the rational, the intellectualism is lost. God is not encountered through the logos today, but through feelings. So it is not the same God, yeah? It is certainly not a dangerous God, a God that can serve also as a point of departure for a rational
Hallmark God?
What, Chris?
Hallmark God?
I don't understand.
Like on a Hallmark card. I
mean, yes. Well, I mean, okay. But it cannot serve as a point of reference for, let us say, a solid, rigorous correction of political life and mores.
Would it be helpful at all to bring in some other names of different artists and painters? I was just thinking about Cezanne, and I guess as a result of that, of Cubism, because to hear Israel talk about the dignity of Velázquez, and moreover of classic art or traditional art in general versus the modern art, individual art, you see this pivot point with someone like Cezanne, who legend has it couldn't draw, so he had to devise a geometrical method of rendering shapes, and so there was introduced a kind of formalism into painting. Personally, and it was pointed out to me with a friend one time, just looking at a bunch of paintings by Cezanne, that although they're very formally and well done and very decorative indeed, they do verge towards this kind of caricature of the human form, which is not entirely dignified to my eye. Others might differ in their view, but that was a compelling argument to me at the time, looking at some of those paintings at random, more or less, just some of the portraits, how he renders people. There's a kind of a coldness, a remove from the subject, even though it's depicted very prettily, very formally well. And it makes a very, very nice object of art to hang on your wall. There is a reduction somehow taking place there of the human into an aesthetic object, essentially.
Right. And that's my main trouble with modern painting. That is my main trouble with it. That it is even though Cézanne, you still have elements of the human. You know, you still have that in Cézanne. You have it in Renoir.
Well, you do, but I'm just looking at some of these portraits.
But that's my problem
Yeah.
with modernism, is that it dismisses the human being. The you know, it carves up the shapes. It removes the human individual as important in the painting. You know, it could be anybody.
Well, let me just ask this: what is the value for us in going back through the history of art? I think Marco pointed out that a lot of the most revered artists and thinkers often weren't as well informed about the entire panoply, the history of art, the history of thought, as we are. I read certain people he would have not read, other people who are we are well familiar with. And likewise with art, there is a certain kind of a legacy that is handed over the ages from master to pupil, and much can be made about that. Much can also be missed about what if there is any particular place in the history of art to look, or a collection of places, or what have you, what would you say to that?
Sorry, what do you mean, looking at the history of art?
Well, you say that you are very fond of Velázquez. You say that you're from a working class background. It wasn't exposed necessarily to a lot of art growing up.
Yes,
And
because
mostly it was this counter-reformation stuff that really invigorated you on this topic.
Correct.
And I'm just wondering why. Perhaps a more precise question would be, why do you think Velázquez could be the kind of painter at the time? And could you have another Velázquez today? What would that?
Well, I don't think you can paint like Velázquez, but the reason why I look at Velázquez and I'm inspired by Velázquez is this humanity in the paintings, and that I do feel that in our time, that is the thing that is going to keep arts going in the technological age. So a greater focus on humanity and one's perception of reality. That is where I think art can survive in this time.
Just to slightly play devil's advocate to that, though, you could easily find examples of art that is very halt in its attempt to dignify the human being, and yet falls prey to any number of formal errors or sloppy, unskilled draftsmanship types of things. So, and then on the other side, you have someone like Cézanne, who I just described as the opposite of that. So yes, survive, but to the point of the illustrious Paul Rhodes, there is this need to bring back, or to resuscitate, or keep a torch alive in some manner of there are technicalities that go with painting. There's the mixing of paint, the kind of paints you use, the certain observations that really you only get by years of painting and working with other painters who know such things. There's a strong argument to be made that there's an inherited wisdom from such sources that is not to be breezed aside. I mean, what would any of you say to that?
Israel, do you want to jump in?
Well,
yeah.
I don't. I think from my own perspective, of doing art, is that I believe in drawing, drawing from the model. I see that as the basis of art, drawing from the model. But I do not believe in a modernist or modern interpretation of that process. But obviously, these things, they all can enlarge your way of viewing the figure. But the main basis, as I see it in art, is the model, and you learn to see like form, space, and all that stuff.
Well, the reason I think Paul's description of the illustrative versus the decorative is useful, if only pedagogically, is it's a way for Paul's discourse on painting to cut through a number of enemies in one fell swoop. So
Yeah.
Paul doesn't like the classical realists, and he doesn't like the people who've gone beyond the pale with abstraction and etc., and all the various tentacles of contemporary art. So it's a clean blade it's a nice clean blade to slice down the hay of those foes. Didactically, and I can definitely see in our, when Paul talks about the decorative versus the illustrative, I can certainly see what he means, and it does give me a greater appreciation for someone like Cézanne, despite what I just said, critical of Cézanne, because you notice in Cézanne a certain unity of form, and a certain formal mastery of the subject matter under a kind of a strange formulaic approach, which then goes on to perhaps pervert the well of art generally via cubism. But I don't know what to make of it beyond that, because
I have a problem with Paul's ideas. Seeing things through a modernist perspective. If you're going to see that, you could use any form of like postmodern movement, back at painting and look back at painting and see it in that way. But
he's modern because of how he analyzed the history of art.
Well, he's looking at paintings. He's looking at painters like Boucher and saying they're cubists.
Well, but no, they're not cubists. But I know what he means.
Yeah, but this is my problem with it, is that it's looking at painting as if it is an aesthetic formula.
It's Paul, yeah.
That's my problem. That's my problem with it. Painting is not an aesthetic formula.
Yeah.
The artist has to bring their experience to the aesthetic experience to make it meaningful. So you have a book, you have a writer of a book, you can learn all the words you want, you can be as literate as you want, but can you write a good book? You have to bring the artist into the book.
It's true. It's absolutely true.
This brings, if I may interject there, this brings us to the question of what it means to teach and learn. And this painting is simply one discipline, but then we can carry this on to the general question of human action and human learning, and then say, well, is it about applying certain universals to a particular, or what is it that we are learning? What is it that we are teaching? Can you teach love? You're with a lady, yeah, and you read the Kama Sutra, and you read all the books in the world, and now, well, I mean, okay, I will. You read all the books on boxing, and then you go into the ring, and you face Mike Tyson, and now all of a sudden you forget about all the books you read. And when you encounter the girl, all of a sudden you forget about all the books you read and all of the certainty that you had.
Or I say, I look at the book, I say, oh my God, she doesn't love me.
Yes, yes.
Ah,
I mean, I can look at the cell phone and the cell phone tells me it's raining. I look at the sky and it says, and I see the sun out, and I say, oh, I must be wrong. It's the phone that is right.
Oh.
So this leads us into a terrible realm of alienation from the classical understanding of imitatio naturae. Okay, but this imitatio naturae came through in the element of doubt, as I emphasized in the recent video and elsewhere in articles. But I mean, as my literary heroes emphasize, it comes through the element of doubt, and therefore of reason. What do I mean by that? Well, what we have today is this alienation of feelings, the content, or the content to reduce to feelings, and then a form, universal, conceived mechanistically. Now, in the case of Paul, for example, in the case of Paul, yes?
Well, I'd just like to pose something.
Yes.
In the midst of all of this,
Yes.
which is the manner in which art is quote unquote consumed, the way in which art is experienced, seen, changed.
I don't know if you consumed it before, but yeah, go ahead. You're breaking down.
Can you hear me all right?
Breaking up there. Yeah.
1 second. Let me put on my Wi-Fi and see if that improves things. Yeah, well, art became more of a private object, hence, how crazy it is now. Right. So, but pulling back, just thinking about how people actually experience art, and when an art object becomes something in your home, it changes nature.
Well, but Chris, you're breaking up. But the problem is the home. The home is privatized in a very modern way. There is the alienation of the private from the public, which is very modern. And again, this goes with the private reduced to sentiment, feelings in the without providence, without reason, and the outside is a machine that is imposed, and we have to, there's a contractual conception of ordinary life, of political life, of human life. Now, how do you vindicate the human?
Allow me to continue for just 2 seconds. Like with music, it's very.
Yes.
Can you hear me? I tried to raise my phone so I'd get better reception. But with music, clearly, you play certain music in private, and you play certain music in certain company, and perhaps other music in other company, right? And you've made the point following Da Vinci, that Leonardo, that painting has to do with solitude. So the painter has to be in solitude to paint.
Hey, but wait. Solitude does not mean you have to lock yourself up, as in the caricature that Paul gave. It doesn't mean you have to go in the desert physically.
I'm not saying that either.
Yes.
I'm making a much more like commonsensical remark.
Okay.
Which just I'm just opening a kind of a quandary, really. In case such a thing were relevant, because I think perhaps it is relevant to how painting progressed historically. Because there's the new there's the modernists, the first wave, second wave, modernists, all these events taking place following really and then following the financialization of art. I mean, can we talk at all about that and how the art market
But
works? I mean,
this is
that's a huge conundrum, or how would you put it? I mean, it's in the background. It's been this purring engine in the background this whole time. We've been
this
talking
point,
about-
Chris, I'm sorry, but this is implied directly in the scenario in that I was
Okay.
describing.
All
The
right.
feelings are the feelings of the private self are faced with the overarching machine. This machine of the shackles and the hyenas
Sure.
of merchants
Sure.
is taking over and is administrating all of our private feelings. And
Well,
so,
okay.
yeah, and this
I hope
stems
not
from,
mine, but yeah. Right.
this is a manifestation of a consummate, deplorable, obviously, manifestation of the premise, which was the rise of this modern self and the notion that the self is a particular
Right.
devoid of
Sure.
providence that has to be
Yeah,
raised.
follow.
It has to be raised to the universal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And ultimately,
it's
ultimately, it's
depraved.
going to be
It's
the merchants who do this.
It's depraved. Yeah.
You know, that's all. And when
What
it
you
comes
gonna do? What you gonna do? Call Scooby Doo and the squad?
to call Ghostbusters,
Call the Ghostbusters? What we gonna do?
yes. Well, that's the other side of the coin that of course I've been exploring, but with Leopardi, for example, Leopardi's intervention, that is
Mhm.
of great importance. But to begin with, one needs to recognize the core problems and explore them and delve into them by letting go of, well, of elements that might obscure them and alienate us from those
Well,
problems.
I guess let me pose a scenario. You're walking through a museum with a new friend, and you've just listened to this discussion about art, and what are you going to say about these things? Is you see them, you see these Cezannes and these Picassos, and they're doing something. They're affecting your soul somehow. How are they? I mean, I guess I'm just interested in jumping off from a lot of these points.
Look,
Yeah.
there obviously, as I said earlier, Velázquez, but later, in fact, we're at a stage where Picasso speaks to the ordinary person more than Michelangelo does, more than Leonardo does, more than, of course, needless to say, more than Cibabue and Giotto do. So, the question, in going back to Leopardi, in a time of great corruption, of narcissism, all we seek from the painting is a confirmation of how great we are, of our legitimacy, of our, of the legitimacy also of a life of a pursuit of self-empowerment. So anything that is not compatible with it doesn't speak to us anymore. Well, it does. The problem is that we don't have receptors for it. We're corrupt.
Where did our receptors go?
We're corrupt. They're saturated by filth.
Hmm.
And when you say, well, let us dignify the human being, let us vindicate also the dignity of the human being. What is this human being? We need to recover a philosophical anthropology. But if I conceive myself as a mere individual, and therefore, in terms of the modern self, in the context of history, of evolution, and ultimately I have to face this problem. What the hell am I? You say, well, maybe I want to go to God. Why not? Of course. But at the same time, I'm taught in school that the primary motor in the human being and all animals is this will to power. You know, the vulgarized version is the survival of the garbage from Darwin, popularized version. But of course, in earlier times, and even for Velasquez, as they're saying, the primary motor is not this will to power or the libido dominandi. That's corruption, because they presume that there is an original blessing. They're open to it. And so the primary motor and also the proper end of man is God. But for us, God is just an abstract universal. Thank you, Hegel.
Yes.
So it doesn't work. It doesn't speak to us because we're so saturated by modern doctrines.
Yeah, sure.
It just won't work. In order to free ourselves from our blinders, we would have to study, go over not the history and the thought. That's a modern invention. The unfolding of this modern Leviathan, going back to its roots, exposing those roots to what was before it, and so we need to refamiliarize ourselves with what is before it. Renaissance, not Machiavellian Renaissance, the primary Renaissance, medievals, the ancient classics, and so Platonic tradition, and then only then can we begin to regain a sense of the genuine dignity of man. Then we can start speaking seriously of vindicating that dignity, that heroic element of man, without anxiety, without historical consciousness crap, without this scientific delusion that we have today. There is scientia in the classical terms, of course, but it has very little to do with the mechanistic one of our times. So
painting is a battle to be won outside of painting.
But no, painting alone is a fetish. There's no such thing. What Paul wants is an illusion. There is no such thing as this autonomous discipline. Painting had always been tied to philosophy, not as attitudes, as abstract ideas, but as awareness of the fundamental problems of life. So Leonardo speaks of philosophy.
There's not a contradiction, though, and is there a contradiction in engaging with philosophy and being a painter and teaching painters?
No, but it is a problem when it comes to the understanding of teaching painting in Paul's modernist terms. And I think Israel is perfect. Israel has a point. And I would emphasize that in terms of this problem of nature. Nature is the teacher. It's not imitatio of other painters, as we see. And I mean, Paul, for example, has these imitations of certain painters' compositions. He picks a little from Tiziano, a little from this, a little from that, and the colors from this, a little from that, and he tries to fit them all with feeling.
Well, people can make a living painting, though. I mean,
what for? To make a living?
Yeah. Well, you have to make a living, don't you?
Yeah. If you're a whore, yes. Today you have to be a whore. If you're not a whore, you cannot please corrupt people.
Wouldn't it be easier to make dignified art in a setting where painters who did not paint horrible atrocities were rewarded for it?
But we live in very corrupt times. So in order to be esteemed, you recognize you need to cater to the whims of the corruption. If you're an honest man, you're going to be addressing that corruption, and people ain't going to like it.
Can I just say something about Paul's ideas? I have actually Paul's ideas are nothing new. This early modernist view of art is nothing new. I was taught it for 30 years. by Lawrence Gowing. Lawrence Gowing is the authority on Cézanne. And I was taught by people who were taught by Lawrence Gowing. And I was taught for like 16 years. And I had a problem with it then, because what it does is it limits the language of painting. It puts the painter in a straitjacket. And modernism then further restricted the freedom of the painter to an end that it became, which Paul rejects himself. He rejects the conclusions of modernism.
Yeah.
So why go back? And the thing is, I'm not like a classical realist. I actually like early modernism. Okay? But I do not want to be in an aesthetic straitjacket.
Well,
Because for me, painting is more than the aesthetic experience.
yeah.
The aesthetic experience is fueled by the human experience of the artist. If painting was about teaching their technique, and then the learners of the technique became the greatest painters, it hasn't happened that way in history.
No.
I think I was looking at Raphael. Is it Giulio Romano? His pupil is a far weaker artist than Raphael, because he's not Raphael. He doesn't have the thoughts of Raphael. He doesn't have the persona, and yet he was taught by Raphael, so you expect him to be a better painter, but he's not. Nor is Vasari better than Michelangelo.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's not
No,
necessarily.
no. But what I'm saying is that aesthetic formula,
yeah,
is not the ends, but it's the means. And so, and that's why painting has continually changed over time. You cannot have one true style of painting. To me, that sounds like an insanity, as we see that painting has changed throughout time. And painting is a reflection, as Marco says, of the philosophy of the times and of the philosophy of man. And that is what gives life to the aesthetic of painting.
Well, a painting ought to be like a poem, perhaps. In that well, I mean, I've been reading a little bit of Leonardo on difference between painting and poetry, and I'm not really I mean, I painted these behind me, but I'm not really a painter, and I definitely relate to what you say, because whenever I do paint, it's I I do it for my own reasons, and I don't really have a strong lens. I'm going through it all during that process of any kind.
What?
Other than what I find.
Maybe you're underestimating those reasons, though, Chris.
Which reasons?
Maybe you're underestimating your reasons.
Maybe, perhaps. Well, I painted
your own reasons. Your own reasons are a big question mark. They're not just your own.
No, they're private. They're private, sort of.
Nah.
But well,
we all have a common motor. Children draw by nature. So then you'd have to investigate what is going on in painting, but you cannot properly understand it as autonomously from the various other spheres of disciplines, of activity, of human agency. For you do have other spheres of agency. That's where I have been trying to insist. When Socrates goes to the cobbler, he goes to the various trades, and he even goes to the statesman, and goes to the sophist, which is the rhetorician, and so forth, the poets, and tells them that, you don't know what you're doing, because you're understanding your discipline autonomously instead of seeing it in the light of the nature of human agency.
Sure.
This is what we need.
There's this huge problem with being an artist or a painter, and that, how are you going to make money and survive? And and do these things, but that's only if you approach painting in this rarefied manner.
Okay, it can be a discipline. It can be a trade, of course. It should be. I think it deserves to be. But all I'm saying is that today, especially in a state of radical corruption that we find ourselves in all respects and all dimensions, it behooves us, the painter, the person who is seeking to be a painter, as a child, okay? It behooves us to re-examine, to reflect upon the nature of motivation, the nature of human action. Okay, these are fundamental problems. They're not just abstractions that come into play. They never came into play a posteriori. For Michelangelo, he was deep.
No, the only reason I made my prior remark, was I was just thinking about I don't know, the different kinds of art that people wind up making and why they make it. Because you're right, people paint by nature. I have two children. They both like to draw. You're right, it's a completely inborn thing. Yet some people are having a special affinity with it, I think also by nature. And so some people are predisposed to become painters characterologically. It's because of who they are. Maybe it's because of how they grew up, setting. I mean, there's something about painting, about drawing. It's silent, no words. That's why quote unquote literature is the enemy of painting. Because painting is about something more. It's deeper.
Well, I do not agree with that proposition that Paul espouses.
Maybe it's not deeper, but it's. I don't
know.
No,
I mean the enemy story.
The enemy story?
Yes, I do not. I reject that proposition.
Why?
About no, because first of all, you're reducing the logos to modern literature. That's the sort of innuendo there. But I mean, it's sort of an implication. But aside from that, painting comes through the logos. Painting comes through the logos.
But modernism is based on manifesto. Modernism is based on literature, on manifesto.
Yeah. There is no, as I emphasize elsewhere, there are no feelings without concept. This is the delusion of modern man. The private feelings and that are oblivious to the form that is administrating them, the overarching form. And it just winds up being an alienation of feelings from their forms.
I'm just trying to connect what you're saying to people I know. That's all.
Yes.
That's all. I have no opposition to anything you just said.
I'm sure you don't.
Could you elaborate, Marco, on what the form of a feeling might be? Are you talking about the soul, or are you talking about something else?
Well, it is now the question. This is an important problem. What is the proper natural do feelings have? In the medieval talk, you have matter is always in form. There's no such thing as matter without form. So talk about matter in technical terms without having to worry about form is puerile. It's silly. It is just very silly. All matter is informed. There's no such thing as informed matter.
I got very interested in pattern making for a long time. I made a lot of tapestries and patterns using mostly digital stuff to make them, these digital images. But as a consequence, I also became very interested in, Islamic art and, Oriental patterns that one encounters. There's this point about the decorative, right? That there does seem to be, to me, this purely decorative thing, and it's not tied to drawing in the same way. Because you say children by nature draw, but children by nature don't necessarily create patterns. Or what would you say to that?
Well, it's rough. Come on, for the child. But when it comes to Islamic art, let me emphasize this. We have, again, a tendency, given our modernist outlook and the emphasis on feelings that want to become God, we have the tendency to see that as mere decorative, mere decoration. Whereas then you have to return to, what about the Islamic setting? I'm not historicizing anything. I'm just saying that if you encounter them as they are meant to be encountered, okay, there's a lot of subtlety and mystery involved, and there's obviously an opening to the mystery of the divine. These are not
kind of
decorative.
There's a kind of sacred geometry or something at play, it seems to me.
There's all kinds of things.
Of course, it's not purely decorative. That would be stupid to assert. I'm just saying, it's not illustrative either. So when you have this discourse about returning dignity to the beggar being on equal footing with the Pope, the mixed race beggar with the Pope, what do you say to this great elegance and dignity of something that is entirely abstract?
But
and yet is not,
it's not even
modern abstraction.
Right. It's not a modern abstraction. Nevertheless, if you're speaking about Islamic painting, obviously that begs. I mean, it's. Should I?
Just saying, next door to painting is sculpture, and next door to sculpture is architecture, and all of these things, the nine muses, right? We can talk about the muses. Paul loves to bring in the muses, the nine sisters, the daughters of Zeus, the goddesses, the great goddesses of
not so great
of art.
Yeah.
The muse commands.
No, she never commands. That's a wrong translation. That's a false translation. No, it's a false translation. Demande, and it was referring to the completely opposite, almost, attitude of the muse in the original poem, where the poem begs the prince to intervene. The muse begs the prince to intervene on behalf of the poet.
With great courtesy, I'm sure.
Yeah, no, and submission. So the muse is submitted to the authority of the prince. There's nothing to do. Demande. There's a twisting of the word in translated literally as demand. That's not what it means in the original. It's completely fake.
So basically, Paul is a crypto-feminist. Paul's a crypto-feminist, is what I'm
getting.
No,
he simply wants to say that the muse now commands, and he's sort of she's the Lord, and the painter now is autonomous, and he becomes an authority, and he says, how can you question my authority? That it's just anachronistic.
I see. I'm being cheeky. I'm just being cheeky, but yeah.
No, there's no such thing. The painter never has been the authority.
He can't command. He can't tell the painter. Because I walked into the Fine Art Museum the other day, and I always see it. My favorite statue there is one of the muses of lyric verse, and they're very. What do you make of the muses? Where do their stories originate from? How do we have these figures, these great elegant figures?
Look, it's not me, but it was always known that it was classical. Virgil, the poet projects himself in the muse. The muse is a poetic image of the poet's soul, and the voice's voice, the logos.
The muse doesn't really exist. You can't pray to them. Yeah.
There is a lot of irony in Virgil. Read the classics and you'll find out. In Dante, Beatrice, they're all muses. Leonardo's muses. They're all muses. And they all have this allegorical, it's not of the essence.
I'm not trying to frustrate you.
No, I'm not frustrated. I'm just telling you what is I think should be obvious, but unfortunately everything has been obscured by a modernist, hyper-modernist trash.
I'm sorry for lowering the standards of this discussion.
Yeah. You modernist. Yes, right. But now, this is all a problem. And to get back to the problem of teaching, which is at the heart of this formulation, the problem of teaching. Who is our teacher? And with Paul, there seems to be precisely this alienation from the classical understanding of learning. It is nature who is the primary teacher, and that is possible if and only if nature is the receptacle of the divine. And that is, of course, the whole point of the incarnation, incidentally, the pure, immaculate, and so forth. So if nature is, if we have access to a pristine nature, but how do we access a pristine nature in our corrupt, fallen condition? It is through the logos. But if you get rid of the logos and you understand it in simply mechanistic terms, you're screwed. You have no access to pure nature, and you reify the purity of nature in terms of your projecting of your own feelings onto the world through certain techniques. So I use the certain techniques to project my feelings onto the world, and I end up with certain neo-romantic, works. Which, okay, it's sort of it's not an evil thing. But now to go back to Israel's point, he objects. Well, there is no such thing as true painting. Well, it's a very ambiguous expression, true painting. I mean, what is fake painting? What is false painting? And we could say that there's true, in classical terms, true painting in the sense that there's a painting that helps us see the truth. And that would be a poetic painting. But poetic, again, not in the modern sense of feelings. I'm imbuing the world with my feelings. This is a very romantic problem. You see this tension between, is it nature who it is it nature that has these feelings that descend upon us, right? What do we do? Or is it we who attribute our feelings to nature? Or our feelings are already there? This whole romantic tragedy ultimately collapses. If we want to be ensnarled by it, we don't want to be, but if we remain, as long as we remain ensnarled by it, then we're doomed. We're dead meat in the face of the marketplace of technocracy. Nobody's what are we vindicating? The human being in the light of contemporary anthropology? You got to be kidding me. You're just a piece of meat. So shut up and get your boosters. And trust
Look at those
the machine.
boosters, man. Well, yeah, wait, I got one right here. There you go. There you go.
That's it. Yes. That's it.
Just trying to keep things light. I'm trying to keep things light,
Right. Well, you might as well. Here's another one.
Yeah.
Here, I got this up there for my kids. Here's a booster. Get the little needle and you stick it in.
Oh, that's really good.
That's it. So
Gotta keep our senses of humor out in this ragged wind.
Well, So can nature be our teacher? Well, you say, Verrocchio taught to Leonardo. There was a mockery of his. Taught to Leonardo, obviously, huh? Well, but what did he teach him? He taught him how to see. He taught him how to revere nature as pregnant with that logos that entitles nature to be your teacher. Nature is no longer just a place where you can embolden your feelings and project and cultivate your feelings so that you can then project upon nature. We're so alienated from this. They're so alienated today from this understanding, classical understanding of things. Michelangelo Merisi da Caravaggio, he would argue against some of his contemporaries that they had gone astray And well, we could say they don't have true painting because they no longer studied from nature. They didn't. That doesn't mean you have to look at the picture, the model. No, no, no. They didn't listen to nature. But that can make no sense if you don't understand that the imitatio natura, the imitation of nature, is not a mechanical imitation of a mechanically constituted image, but it has to do with tapping into the mode of generation. Generatio, natura means natura naturans primarily. It is that motor, generative motor of things. How do things come into being? And it's not something accidental to painting. It's not accidental to painting, as Paul suggests, but dismisses the point and say, well, but everybody does that. No, absolutely not.
Right.
It is very difficult, especially in very corrupt times, to recover that free, non-mechanistic understanding of nature as being the receptacle of a logos. And this logos is teaching you. It is not, again, the surrealism. Leonardo is surreal. Michelangelo is surreal. Heck, Velázquez is surreal.
I'm surreal every day.
But not in the modern sense, where you take LSD and you have these confused experiences, and then you project them back onto your ordinary experience. And again, the problem with reality. What is reality? Is reality simply my ordinary experience, or reality is the fullness of experience in God? There are fundamental questions that are systematically obscured today by our habits that have been formed by modern discourse. Let's that's where we stand today. And to underestimate these problems, well, we're doing it at our own peril and a loss. Thoughts, objections? Shoot.
I don't have any objections. Maybe just a different coloration. Maybe a second glaze.
Joachim?
Well, I was gone briefly because my phone had died.
No.
So
Sorry.
the note you ended on, I had no objections against.
Yeah, I mean, I still feel like there is a lot that remains unsaid.
Thank God. Thank God.
But a great deal remains unsaid.
Thank God.
Like whether the form of anger is a different one than the form
Despite how much we have spoken today, a lot remains to be said.
This is a problem of that is addressed by when we speak about mysticism. What is the most important thing in painting? Is it what is said or what is not said? What is shown or what is not shown? And in modern painting, modernist painting, we have the tendency to obscure the unseen by elevating the seen to a pretense of the unseen. That is where, for example, again, I'm responding to earlier recent objections. Paul objects to Leonardo. He says, well, what the way things manifest themselves are or is the things in their manifestation. The manifestation of things is for us the way things manifest themselves. But no, it's a big question. If you want to reconcile the two, good luck with that. But I mean, you do that in painting. Painting is precisely this work of accounting for the manner in which things have appeared to us. And that manner will, of course, alter our perception of things. It will educate our perception of things, and things will no longer appear the way they did before, because we are investigating the manner in which, well, the finite emerges out of the infinite, really. But we cannot resolve that gap. It would be as saying, I can measure the distance from the finite to the infinite. That's modernity, and it's foolish. It ends up in disaster. It collapses. There's the self-destruction of modern reason is all about that. And we end up with the marketplace and technocracy and the replacement of man with a new man, who's the third Adam, the robot. Now, you can decry that, but then to do that seriously, to object to it seriously, is also to question the premise. That's what I'm suggesting here.
Mm-hmm.
Israel?
Yes, I agree with you, Marco. I agree with your points about nature and all you've said. That is the mysterious aspect of painting. That's why it cannot be fully determined as this is it, because it's an experience of nature itself, of philosophy, as you say, and therefore you cannot pin it down to a particular aesthetic formula. You can learn drawing, and this is what my personal advice was, to learn drawing, learn everything you possibly can, but it's not going to guarantee you true painting, because true painting is, as you said, Marco, a relationship to nature and to thought and man's connection with nature and with philosophy. That is the mystery of painting. I don't know if you agree.
Inject a parenthesis on the question of experience. I would suggest that given our current situation, painting would involve a shift, metanoia even, from my experience to an experience that is constitutive of this me. It is not, to quote a thinker of the early 20th century, it is not that experience is mine, but that I am this ego is constituted in a field of experience. The shift from the former to the latter is what painting is getting at. It is no longer subjective in modern terms. That is a modern illusion. It is not my experience, but it is that I'm constituted and redeemed, constituted fundamentally and redeemed with respect to the first scenario, modern scenario. I am constituted in this field of experience. Okay. So who is experiencing me? Is it society? Well, that's the a modernist extremism. No. Well, we could say in Pauline terms, St. Paul, God experiences me, the man. So man is constituted in the sphere of an experience that is no longer mere subjective experience, but noetic experience. Now this becomes a very philosophical problem. And that is why Leonardo himself speaks of painting as philosophy. He says it, not me, jackass. He, Leonardo da Vinci, says that philosophy, that painting is philosophy. He also calls it poetry. And he calls poetry a form of painting. That is a digression. We've been discussing problems, and to settle these problems is to do a disservice to ourselves, to our nature, and to the problems. The question is not to solve problems, but to return to them as living, permanent reality. We are compelled as modern people, because we're driven by bad ideas, some would argue. Langiulli would emphasize this. Nino Langiulli, who taught in St. Francis College in Brooklyn. There's a tyranny of bad ideas. And we assume that we have to hurry up and solve the problems instead of appreciating the fact that being grateful to the fact that we have those problems. Those problems, the fundamental problems are there, and they're problems that constitute a kind of a sphere of awakening, of thought. Oh, but you have to hurry up and make a living, make a buck, Chris. Sell that painting. That kills painting. Kills it. Rembrandt's greatest work is the work that he could never sell. It is the most intimate, spontaneous, and mystical, if you like, work of his. Question mark.
You're talking about the work that's in the Rijksmuseum, right?
It's not only one, but the later work, yes, including the conspiracy. So, and again for Tiziano, Titian, idem, and various painters, as a matter of fact. It's ultimately painting would then not be about impressing people, about showing, but about calling people to what is not seen. The aesthetic is mute vis-a-vis this mandate. The aesthetic, yes, but as some honey in Dante's terms, to bring people back. But if you start emphasizing the honey and saying the honey is everything, oh no. In Leopardi's words, painting, sure. I mean, poetry, dilettare, sure. It pleases the people, but then there's a problem. What if the people are corrupt? Only poison will please them. Oh, the point was that pleasure, sure, but what for? Honey, sure, you need some beauty, but beauty is not of the essence of painting, because painting has to integrate beauty and the ugly, both. What is ultimately the problem is what is true.
But that's to speak of things.
Eh?
Painting must speak of things. What else is there?
Of the soul of things, yeah. Of the nature of things, of the source, which involves the source of things. And so not a matter of, okay, ooh, this looks so real, say the mechanics of our day.
Could I read a poem I wrote today?
If everyone agrees to it, yes.
If you'd allow it, and then I gotta go. I think the time is right
Okay.
for me. My children are arriving.
All
This
right.
one's called Honest Perceptions. It goes, a dispute once arose in the 1st century AD. It was not a particularly glorious day, except looking back, some will say. A man was weeping. That's not all he did. But let's skip ahead just a bit. No, not at that part. We know it too well. Let's stick to the deeper cuts. They cast their own spell. Because people you know said that that was God, the weeping man. And a wave of people gave a nod. And a wave of people gave a shake. And then the jig was up. And then he was up and gone, for goodness sake. But before all that drama unfolded, someone said God. God who? Why would he send a white bird, the dove, and not a crow? Not a cuckoo. And not a cuckoo. And then a truly widespread clamor clucked its tongue and grew. Some things, I suppose, are just a mystery, although at this point it's all ancient history. But let's say you took an old sot from the days of Lancelot. Well, you might not learn a lot. You might not honestly learn a thing. But I'm not a history teacher, so here's a swing. Let's place the setting precisely. Under the reign of one of the old ballsy popes, who had the boys with the bells and the boys with the ropes. Then by the wide cindering hearth, the castle bailiff, a charming sot, describes for you his past travels as a soldier, and he amuses you with his crusades and meanders a lot, pausing for emphasis on every detail, showing both humor and respect, a decorous vision of valor and virtue, richly laid with impromptu intellect. The battles he'd stabbed at, and the places he'd rested, Jerusalem's coast, crisp and airy, and greased by the sea, the toppled statuary. But I wouldn't put it past a man like that to put down his cane and his hat and go on to describe some nonsense, like a troll guards the hills and attacks by the streams. Such men are all liars, but their lies are their dreams, for horseless men to ride atop and scream. That's it.
Thank you, Chris. Well, send me the text and I'll include it beneath the video. All right.
Very good. Okay.
And as far as birds are concerned, yeah, that
Mhm.
too is an open question.
About the dove, really?
Yeah, well, it also brings to mind the
not the dove.
eagle.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
the imperial eagle. It turns out the eagle for the Romans originally was a vulture.
Mm.
You know, they said that they followed the eagle to see where to found the city of Rome. Well, it was actually a vulture that they were following because the vulture would go to the water,
Ah,
drink,
interesting.
but it didn't sound very good.
Yeah, right.
So they went for the eagle.
Follow the
Much better.
vulture. Everyone, let's follow the vulture.
Imagine if Rome had on its banners a vulture. That wouldn't sounded very good.
Does Israel, do you have an email address? I guess you might.
Yes,
Uh,
it's
We can share it. We can share it later.
Yeah,
I'll
yeah.
let you
all right.
know.
Very well. I must go, unfortunately.
Okay.
But I'm sending you the poem over email, you and Joe. Connect with me later, Israel. I'm sorry, if you want.
Okay.
It's been nice speaking with you.
you too.
Okay.
You too. Okay.
Right.
Thanks.
Yes, we don't see your hymn. There you go. This is the honey for the public. The public enjoys to see some a recognizable, iconic face.
You want to have a face with a name, yeah.
Well, yes, you can give me a little mask, and maybe Israel, if we ever can join together again, you can show us a mask.
The same face twice. The same face
Yeah.
twice.
Ah,
I'm also Marco.
who is this? Let me see. I can't see very close.
I'll show you later.
Okay. Just to have because as an icon, Israel, you could maybe manage to work things out with the camera, and you can show an image of a mask, so that we can.
Yes, I have plenty masks, and I also have plenty busts, sculpture busts.
Wonderful, wonderful. I think I saw one in one of your videos.
You also have plenty of pasts.
Yes, of
And
life.
perhaps even presents, at least once a year.
Shared
Right.
concerns as we wrap up. The engine has given us 2 minutes and change.
I would just like to say that I liked your Leonardo video, Marco, and I think that you've nailed, you've nailed it on the head. What I was thinking about painting.
Mm.
That as what you've just said, I think it's intellectually plausible.
Yes, I'm not trying to nail painting to a formulation, but as in that infamous question, what is a woman? It was not asked by going after the ultimate formulation, the definition, but a decent characterization, a way that makes sense, that accounts for the seriousness of the problem. That's all. So I welcome formulations and questions, because ultimately this is what this is all about, and restoring painting in the light of the fullness of the human being.
Good. Enjoyed it. I enjoyed talking to you. Thank you.
Joachim, we can extend it a little bit, but your thoughts, you have ruminated for over the course of this meeting.
Well, I mean, there's plenty more to be said. I still have an outstanding question about the passions. There's obviously much more to be said about well, perhaps not that much more to be said about the methodical problem. There are no significant loose threads that I was really dying to see addressed, though. I think for as far as this conference goes, its subject, I think it's been covered pretty well.
Right, we were cut off again by the engine. Joachim.
Common motor.
Right.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, for as far as the conference goes, I mean, we've covered, this matter of individuality, how it has changed in modernity, how this individual has a new content, which instead of feelings, and that works itself out in painting in all these different ways that we've talked about. I missed some of it, but from the sounds of it, we pretty much got there. The only thing about these sentiments themselves, these feelings, these passions, is that they were said to have a form we didn't quite get, or perhaps different forms. Perhaps there's a different form for one sort of feeling than there is for another. We haven't, we didn't get around to that, but us can do that in the comment section or on a different occasion.
Well, let's see if a few words can help do partial justice to this. The habit of conceiving ourselves in terms of feelings. Notice how at the beginning ego was supposed to be rational, the pure reason of Kant, was really mastodontic. And then it turns out that it was hiding all this turmoil of feelings, and it exploded.
Mhm.
That pure reason exploded. And now we have mechanical reason, the reason of the machine, and we have our feelings, this pilote, this
Blob. Slug.
yeah, this mixture, this
Silly putty.
Yeah, of all kinds of feelings, and they're administrated by the machine. Ultimately, means the market. Now,
Therapy.
yeah, I mean, before being, what it seems to be, the human being. What is he? And well, he is okay. Then we have the first Adam, legislator. Is he before being an homo faber? The worker that makes things, he is defined by nothing falling short of the divine mystery. So we are not feelings. What the heck are we then? Are we, if we're not mechanical reason, and we're not the feelings that were boiling within, the passions, what are we? Well, the classical answer, which is placed on an altar by Christianity, is we are logos. The logos that is within the nomos. Nomos is divine necessity, the law, divine law, divine necessity. And in the beginning, in Arche, this logos is seated within divine necessity. This logos is a discourse. It's a freedom understood within as virtue, really, as logos. So it's a kind of discourse. It's a discourse that is enlightening. We partake it as human beings. We partake in it, and in dialogue, in dialogos. So there's an ethical element, character to this logos for us. So, we are. What is the form of feelings? Well, it is. You have to answer that question seriously. You have to go back to the beginning of feelings. Feeling, as you could say, is matter, as I pointed out. But what is matter informed by? Well, it is one form, intellect, but form is involved with its own shadow, as it were, and its content. As it spills out of form, it spills out still within form. So form is alive, and according to the situation, it informs, always going back to the mind. So there's always, it is always the same agency, but of course it is as in government, it is as in love, in a loving relationship. There is no formula to love a lady. If you're stuck with a formula,
Adam
you're
didn't
dead.
have one.
That's it. Requiescat in pagam. That's it. You're dead. That's it. That's the whole point of the lady who is going to. That's all she really is up to. That's her. That's what she's really good at. Breaking the formulas. And she's throwing this curveball, and oops, wait, let me look at that manual here. You're not supposed to do that. That's bad. That's bad. That's not true practice. No, life is not that way. Life is not about following the rules. If anything, it's about breaking the rules. That doesn't mean, however, that you're there with a Nietzschean hammer. It means that that you have to go back to the genuine, creative, constitutive source of rules. That's Christianity, incidentally. It's not antinomianism. It is about returning to the natural divine ground of the rules, and to restore, if there are rules, they're for bad people, not for good people. They're for stupid people. Rules are there for stupid people. If you're smart, you don't need rules. You're just smart. You know what you're doing. You're prudent. You're virtuous. You don't need the rules. You have common sense. And this is what Leonardo is speaking about. So if Verrocchio teaches him something that is lasting in importance, that's to look at nature as a source of understanding. And when he speaks about rules, he means that things themselves emerge conceptually as their own rules. And when he speaks about the principles, now our other interlocutor who did not meet us today, he did not care to join us, but he mocked that as saying, oh, but this is ridiculous, these are not the principles. But in fact, Leonardo says it literally. These are the principles of painting. the point, the line, the surface, and the body that is framed by the surfaces. You see, isn't that pedestrian? Yeah, he sure is. And he sure knew it. He was no idiot. But that's what he is saying about the prince. So much for the principles, he's saying. So much for the principles that I can teach you. That's all I'm teaching you. And the rest is examples. Examples. That, you know, they're nothing scientific in modern terms. You know, he calls it the science, but yes.
For some reason, you know, I come into contact from time to time with old recipe books, and it's, funnily enough, it's very much the same, even with something so ordinary as cooking. They don't give you, you know, the exact methods, the exact measurements. It's, you use flour, use this, use that.
The old ones, right? The old ones.
Yes, the old ones.
But the new ones tell you how to hold the spoon.
It's it. Well, yeah. Hold the spoon in an inoffensive manner.
With
Proceed
the right
to
hand, and then with the left hand, because you don't want to offend the left hand, you know?
Yes, no.
It's a
Yeah.
society of rules and regulations. To transcend it doesn't mean to be antinomian. It doesn't mean that you have to define yourself in opposition to the rules.
Yeah, it's not a dialectic between, I don't know.
That's silly. That's silly.
Yeah.
It doesn't even mean that you're going back to the Urgrund, this
Yeah.
kind of irrational lava underlying you know, all of these rules, and you're going back to the ground you know, abysmal passions.
That's just a springboard for the rules to justify themselves, really.
Yes, that's Satan.
It's what?
Satan.
Yeah, well, yeah. And so then the rules can come back in and see what the alternative is. You don't want that.
Yeah.
You don't want that.
No, I do not. You know, let's have everything safe now.
Yeah.
Safe painting, safe sex, safe life. Everybody's safe. Everybody dead in the negative sense. Everybody neutered. Everybody castrated.
Well, you have to be safe from everybody.
You know, you say, well, isn't this gratitude, is lack of gratitude towards older people, the older generations of painters? Absolutely not. Because you see them not as a sheep, but as those who look, and you are looking where they're looking. They're models for you to look not at them, but at what they're looking at. So you're looking at the source of their own learning. And you cannot avoid doing the same work that they did, which is to say, you love. You have to love. You have to live. And when Leonardo says, be alone, he doesn't mean be in the desert, as the mockery has it, physically. You know, lock yourself up in a box. It means the mind has to be clear of all human teachings. And all human teachings point back, if anything, as reminders, anamnesis, the problem of Platonism. Goes back.
What's the Italian word for alone? What does he use?
Word?
What's the word Leonardo himself uses? What's the literal term for alone?
Solo, solitary.
Yeah.
Solum. Solo uno, only one. E io solo uno, m'apparecchiava a sostener la guerra, sì del cammino e sì della pietate, che ritrarrà la mente che non erra. Dante.
Yeah.
And I only one, Apollo. Solitary. Prepared myself, m'apparecchiava, I prepared, just prepared, to sustain the war. Life and death. you get into the ring and you forget about everything that you've learned.
Yeah.
It's a new encounter. Every day is new. I mean, new as in pristine, original. Original, not in the modern sense that, again, that our interlocutor mocks, rightly so, but in the primary sense that pertains to origins. We're not talking about primitivism. We're talking about origins as in arche, en lo logos. That is all. That is all. Do we have feelings projected onto the world thanks to these techniques, these learnings from men? The wisdom of the world. The wisdom of the world. What is that? And Leopardi on spontaneity.
No.
This is important. We have lost that because we have lost the ear for this naivete, for nature, the source of human wisdom.
Right, to declare for the audience, spontaneity means looking at nature and getting to work, so to speak. In a, there's no layer in between of what we are doing now, or what we might or what Paul might teach. There's no concern that comes between looking and painting, or little less, in to the extent that one is spontaneous. That's what it means, right?
Be a child.
Huh?
You be a child. As an adult, not childish, but as a child. And you're strong, you have acquired, a child needs to acquire strength.
Yeah.
I mean, it can help if you're a father, you understand this. Maybe you can understand better, but as a child, you acquire strength. You need, the plant needs to grow to acquire strength. Now, when you're a man, did you leave the child behind? When St. Paul says, I was a child, I took your childish things, now I'm into serious business. But of course, he is a child still who is taking care of serious business. He takes problems seriously. Before, he was taking them frivolously. The frivolous element has been replaced by seriousness. You don't take yourself seriously. You're still a child.
Yeah, that's why I want to address that point, because I think spontaneity today is too easily understood as frivolity.
But this is because they're taking themselves seriously. It's not spontaneous at all. Sponse. It comes like it's free, of course, but it is a natural impulse that is not through compulsion. This is the fake freedom of our times. Feelings, self-expression, but it's always administrated. See the article in Vogelin View on the problem of feelings in our days, in our times. I don't know if the editor butchered the title or not, I forgot. But we're feelings, and then we are oblivious to the fact that these feelings are administrated by a technocratic regime. This means that when the child says, Daddy, I want this, no, you don't. You're just repeating what the advertisement told you. And they want, these technocrats, merchants who want you to believe, or flattering you into believing or to repeating to yourself that you want something, whereas in reality, yeah.
You have these fads. I know one time they convinced me that I wanted to buy an action figure that smelled like puke. That was the selling point. It smelled like puke. And you have one that smells like rotten eggs. You have one that smells like flatulence. And it's on TV. And yeah, I want it. Well,
Yeah,
and okay, so that's spontaneous, but is it?
No, it's not spontaneous. It
Yeah.
is within spontaneous. It is compulsive. It's compulsive behavior.
Yes. Well, you could go way on the other end, and you could say, terms of metaphysics, okay, but God is also spontaneous. He's not affected by anything. He's not agitated by anything, you know.
Of course.
So that's that contrast can't be maintained, right?
We have fake innocence today. We have fake innocence, and if you don't go through the cross, theologically speaking, you're not going to get genuine innocence. You can pretend to be innocent. You can pretend. You know, we live in the times of pretension. The modern world is founded on the principle of pretending to be good instead of worrying about being good in reality. So we have Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Oh, I was thinking about Shakespeare when you said that.
Okay, yes.
One sees it, you know, constantly.
Yes.
Characters.
Yes.
Even
Right.
in Jane Austen, comes to my mind.
Jane Austen? Yes. Very good.
Oh, it's one of these very key things, you know, seeming and being.
Yeah, and you know, people are misled by appearances, of course. This is obvious, and you know, look with the tragedy of our times. Where are the girls and boys who are reading Jane Austen? Instead, they're reading the trash. If they're reading, the few who are reading trash.
They're reading the Instagram comments, perhaps.
Well, it's Harry Potty and all.
Oh, yeah.
That's the apex, but otherwise it's garbage.
Well, that's very spontaneous. Okay, you don't have to grow up.
No, they're being administrated. The children are being administrated by the machine. That's all.
Yeah.
It's which has replaced the Satan has replaced poetry. Lucifer, in the horrific sense, has replaced the Lucifer that is the poet, the one who brings the light, the carrier, the bearer of the light.
No.
So, well, all right. So our maybe we'll adjourn the conference, and we'll see where this goes, and if relevant facets of the problems emerge, and we'll tackle them. We'll come armed and spontaneous.
Yes, that's right. At our most dangerous that way.
Most dangerous, yes, most dangerous. Namaste.
All righty.